Preview it now with Sir Jeremy Hunt, of course, the former Chancellor and also former Foreign Secretary. Particularly great guest to have today. Sir Jeremy, very good morning to you.
Morning.
Is it right that the spring statement's not going to have any policy changes in it?
Well, I think that's the government's plan, but I think they are going to have to react to the events in Iran. And I was just listening to your conversation with Sophie just now. When I was Chancellor, we used to have a rule of thumb that if international oil and gas prices go up by 20%, that's 1% higher inflation and 0.5% lower growth. And you cannot ignore that kind of impact on the economy. So I think Rachel Reeves will be thinking about whether in the year ahead we're likely to have higher inflation, higher interest rates, more pain in terms of people's pay packets, how much they have to pay for goods on the high street. And I think that will create pressure in perhaps areas we're not talking about yet, such as why have we stopped exploring new oil and gas in the North Sea when we have it right there? Why do we have these big green levies when people are worried about the cost of living? Those kind of debates, I think, are going to become a lot more salient.
So come to that longer term stuff in a second, and also specifically Iran in a second. But stepping back as we approach this fiscal statement, and I guess where borrowing costs are today versus in November, and the lack of crazy coverage leading up to it, is that itself something to be pleased about?
It's definitely a calmer backdrop than we've had ahead of Rachel Reeves's previous fiscal events. That is true. But I think the challenge for her is that her key message, what she wanted to take out of that, was a message about stability. But when you look at the world today, what people are actually going to be saying is, what is your plan for this very unpredictable world that we're now in? And I think the UK is, as I found when I was Chancellor, we're more exposed than other countries to what's happening across the world because our domestic electricity prices are set by international gas prices. So there's a direct link between those prices you were talking about just then. Crude prices up nearly 10%, gas prices up nearly 50% as a result of the attack on the LNG terminal in Qatar. So that, I think, is going to be something where Rachel Reeves is going to need to explain how she is going to make the UK more resilient.
In terms of whether or not those costs to people back home and inflation, and of course, more importantly, the immediate regional threats to life and security in the Middle East are real or not, is it worth the action that the US has taken to remove Ayatollah Khamenei and his direct lieutenants, or not?
Well, I was just looking up this morning something that Churchill once said about war. He said, once the signal is given, no man can control its course. And that applies to Donald Trump just as it applies to everyone else. And I think what we're seeing here, for example, already, perhaps the most unexpected thing is being Iran trying to choosing to aim its fire at other countries in the Middle East. Now, that is something that could have been calculated to have the maximum possible effect on global oil and gas prices. And that is probably not something that Donald Trump was foreseeing. He was expecting attacks on American bases and American interests. So I think we are in a very unpredictable situation. I think there's one other thing that, from the UK's point of view, and I personally think we should have been all in with the United States. I think we made a strategic miscalculation. But whether or not we're in or not, what we have to do is to start being better at defending ourselves. Because until the UK, and indeed Europe, is able to stand on our own 2 feet, then we are going to get pushed around by these global events.
Do you think their intervention was legal?
Well, I think the curious thing about Keir Starmer's position is that you have left-leaning governments in Australia and Canada that clearly think it was, and they found they were able to come out in full support of Trump's action. And I'm afraid it looked like we were dancing on the head of a pin, saying that we couldn't find a legal basis 1 minute and then the next minute we could. I think with this president, you're either all in or you're out in the cold. And our strategic interest is really related to what Sophie was saying, to what Debs was saying earlier, that we still need America to help us defend Europe. American taxpayers pay for around a third of the cost of defending Europe. And we've got to be very careful not to undermine that until we've built up our own defences.
With respect, though, to Canada and Australia, this was an easy thing for them to align with President Trump on. They just had to issue a statement. They don't have bases that were potentially going to be used. I come back to my first question on this, whether or not, all things considered, given where we are, as you outlined, maybe we should have decided to side with Donald Trump or not on this. Do you think it was legal?
Well, I think it was. And I think the legal advice is a lot less clear than Keir Starmer was making out. Obviously, if you ask someone like Lord Hermer, who has a certain set of views about the world, you are going to get a certain answer. But lots of other very distinguished lawyers are saying it is perfectly legal. We have had attacks on UK interests in the last year repeatedly by Iran. So I personally think that the case for self-defense is very justifiable. But I also think that when you're making these very balanced decisions, you have to look at the bigger picture. Right now, we are dependent on the United States for the defense of Ukraine. If Donald Trump pulls the plug on Ukraine, we could see Ukraine capitulating to Russia. That would be incredibly dangerous. That would be directly against the UK's national interests. And that's why I think the Prime Minister did make the wrong call.
Just bring it back to the cost of living for us to wrap things up, Sir Jeremy. I mean, if this persists for more than a week, do you think we're underpricing at the moment the chance of quite a big uptick in inflation in people's bills at home?
Well, we don't know how long this is going to last. But what I would say is that the fact that this seems to be spreading throughout the Middle East, the fact that Iran has closed the Straits of Hormuz, where a fifth of the world's crude oil goes through, means that we have to recognise this may last longer than we would hope. And when I was Chancellor, I would just say this, I had to put aside just under £100 billion to help people with their energy bills. If you remember, people were terrified energy bills were going to go above £2,000. And we put in place plans to help families with that. So if that happens, then there's going to be severe pressure on Rachel Reeves.